If you grew up near the Appalachian Mountains, you already know. Folks don't just make up stories out here, they remember them. I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. It's wild how many of us are sitting in the dark, listening to the same story, scattered across different corners of the country. Hit the like button and subscribe. It helps more people find their way into these woods, whether they should or not. Let's start. My name's Daniel. I was 34 when I set out on what I told myself would be a healing trip. The truth was less noble. My long-term relationship had collapsed a few months before, and I'd been stuck in that hollow phase where you spend too much time staring at empty rooms and listening to the hum of appliances like they're going to speak back. One morning I packed my old Ford with whatever felt like survival gear, half a tank of gas and a spare can, a dented thermos of coffee, a sack of protein bars that tasted like sawdust, and the old Appalachian trail maps I'd bought back in college and never used. No note to anyone. I wasn't running toward anything. I just wanted to get away from the wreckage of myself. By late April, I crossed into Kentucky, the southern stretch of the Appalachian foothills. The interstate bled into narrower roads, and then into veins of cracked asphalt barely wide enough for 2 cars. The forest crowded the shoulders, green pushing up against glass, and I found myself turning the radio off because every station dissolved into static. With the silence pressing in, I realized how loud the woods really were. Layers of cicadas, unseen birds, branches snapping deep among the trunks, like something was pacing me. Somewhere past the Daniel Boone National Forest, I noticed a gap in the trees. It wasn't gradual, like a thinning of brush, but sudden, like the forest had been cut back by a clean stroke. No signs, no names, just an unmarked road diving into the green. I should have stayed on course, but something about the void pulled at me. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe masochism. I turned in. The road was cracked but intact, lined by relics of buildings that didn't belong in any tourist guide. A bait shop with its roof half collapsed, a row of tiny cabins leaning as though they'd grown tired of standing. Every window was blacked out, not with curtains but with boards or grime. It felt wrong, not abandoned in the way of old ghost towns, but suspended, like the people who once lived here had only just stepped away and might return at any moment. My chest tightened as I pulled up to the only place that showed a pulse, a gas station with a flickering orange open sign. Inside, the air reeked of burnt coffee and oil. A single man stood behind the counter. He wore a dirty denim jacket and his hair was tied back in a gray-streaked knot. He didn't greet me. Just looked at me the way you look at a deer wandering into the wrong yard. Then he asked, voice gravelly, "You headed deeper?" I half smiled, tried to play casual. "Just passing through. Figured I'd stretch the wheels a bit." He didn't smile back. His eyes drifted past me toward the tree line outside, and his mouth twisted like he was about to say something bitter. Instead he muttered, "Don't stay past sundown. The woods won't let you back." That should have been enough to make me turn around. But I asked why. He didn't answer me, just pointed with 2 fingers at the window and then looked down like the conversation was finished. The silence between us stretched so uncomfortably that I bought a bottle of water just to have an excuse to leave. Past the station, the road angled uphill. Old houses began to appear, each one in stranger condition than the last. Some sagged into their foundations, half swallowed by kudzu vines. Others looked normal until you noticed all their windows were open, curtains stirring in the wind, as if they'd been left for someone expected long ago. The air itself changed, damp metallic. A faint sweetness threaded through it, like rusted iron mixed with spoiled fruit. My throat tightened until I had to crack the window for relief. That's when the rearview mirror betrayed me. A shape leaned forward in the back seat, just a vague silhouette, too still to be my imagination. My whole body stiffened. I jerked my head around, but the seat was empty. When I faced forward again, my knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I told myself it was exhaustion, nerves, grief. But then a new smell filled the car. Coppery, nauseating, like raw meat left in the sun. I pressed harder on the gas. The road bent sharply, revealing a small white chapel tucked against the slope. Its door stood wide open, swaying slightly, though the air was dead still. I kept my eyes fixed forward, refusing to glance inside. The chapel's bell tower leaned as though waiting for a push to send it crashing down. My stomach knotted. I didn't stop. The first sound hit not long after. A sharp clunk under the chassis, like the road had spat up a stone. The car jolted hard enough to rattle my teeth. I slammed the brakes, heart pounding. When I stepped out, the silence was suffocating. No crickets, no leaves moving. Just me, the car, and the hush of an enormous waiting thing. I checked the tires, intact. The undercarriage, clean. Nothing wrong. Nothing there. But the moment I climbed back inside, the whispers started. At first, it was only a hiss, a draft slipping through the vents. Then as I strained to listen, words emerged, fragmented, jumbled. Leave. Stay. Ours. My hands shook as I twisted the knobs, blasting the radio. All it did was give the whispers a current to ride on. I cut the power, but the voices didn't vanish. They pulsed softer, quieter, coiled into the air around me. I forced the car back into gear and drove. That's when she appeared. Passenger side, as though she'd been there the whole time. A young woman, hair plastered to her cheeks. Water dripping steadily onto her lap, though the seat stayed dry. Her eyes, they were wrong. Dark, but not with pupils. They glistened red like the inside of meat. She didn't look at me. She stared at the glove box, unmoving. My breath snagged in my throat and I blinked hard, convinced she'd vanish when I opened my eyes again. She didn't. She only turned her head slightly, slow as if it hurt, and whispered something I couldn't catch. Then she smiled. Not kind, not cruel, just inevitable. I swerved so violently I nearly clipped a tree. When I looked again, the seat was empty. My chest heaved. My ribs felt too small for my lungs. That's when the torches appeared. They bobbed through the tree line in clusters, moving toward the road. Figures emerged behind them. Tall, stooped, carrying axes, scythes, tools that hadn't seen use in decades. Their heads were covered in burlap sacks with 2 slanted holes cut near the forehead. The cloth stained dark, where eyes should have been. I jammed my foot on the brake. One of them stepped into the road, directly in front of the car, tilting his head like he was studying me. He didn't move aside. I yanked the wheel left, skidding into the ditch, the car jolting and screaming over the gravel until I forced it back onto the track. And then I saw them all, lining both sides of the road, silent as fence posts, dozens of them, maybe more, each one gripping their rusted tool like a farmer on brake, each head cocked slightly in the same angle. My headlights slid across their burlap masks, catching threads, glinting on metal. They didn't move. They didn't blink, just watched. I didn't grow up in a place with forests. My childhood was spent in Kansas, surrounded by land so flat and bare you could track a dog running for half a mile. Out there you knew what was coming long before it reached you. Nothing could hide. And though some folks complained about the emptiness, I always found it comforting. The predictability, the safety in being able to see in every direction. That illusion ended when I hit 31. My younger cousin Trevor had been begging me for months to go on a road trip through the Appalachians. He called it his bucket list adventure. He'd just gotten out of a miserable divorce, and I figured maybe it would do us both some good. I'd been dragging through endless night shifts at the distribution plant, watching my life get whittled down to sleep, work, and more sleep. The trip felt like a lifeline. If not for him, then for me. Trevor was the type to over-prepare. He showed up at my place in Cincinnati with a folder stuffed with printouts, newspaper clippings, even some old Xeroxed maps he'd ordered from God knows where. He'd marked points of interest in bright highlighter. Abandoned mines, forgotten hamlets, stretches of road people swore were haunted. He grinned like a kid on Christmas morning when he dropped the folder on my kitchen table. "We're going to see the real Appalachia," he said. "The parts they don't put on postcards," I humored him. I needed the change. At worst, it'd be a week of winding roads and bad motel coffee. We set off in his beat-up Jeep one late spring afternoon. Windows down, classic rock spilling out, sun dipping behind the hills as we left the interstate. The straight roads gave way to curves and blind corners. Trees pressed closer, their branches arcing overhead until the sky itself felt pinched away. For the first time, I realized how claustrophobic mountains could be. Trevor was thrilled. He kept pulling out that folder, flipping pages like a preacher quoting scripture. "Next stop, Maple Hollow," he said. "Supposedly, people hear voices out there. A dozen stories online about folks vanishing near the creek." I rolled my eyes. "And yet you want us to go there?" "Exactly," he said. "That's the fun." By dusk, we turned off onto a gravel road choked by undergrowth. A hand-painted sign, cracked and leaning, was the only clue we'd found the right place. The forest swallowed us whole. The Jeep's headlights reached only a short distance before darkness drowned the edges. Trevor lowered his window to smell the air, and I was about to scold him when something shifted in the brush. A sharp rustle, like something heavy sliding against bark. He pulled the window up immediately, his smirk faltering. We drove another mile in silence. That's when we saw him. A man stood on the shoulder, angled toward the trees. His arms hung limply at his sides, hoodie hood drawn so far forward that the shadows devoured his face. He didn't hitchhike, didn't move, didn't even turn as our headlights washed over him. Just a figure rooted to the spot, staring into the endless dark. I gripped the wheel tighter. "Did you see?" "Yeah," Trevor said. His voice was smaller than usual. "Yeah, I saw." The road narrowed again, turning into a tunnel of branches. The last hints of daylight vanished. The radio sputtered, gave one wheezing gasp of static, and died. Both our phones flickered black in unison, like their batteries had been drained dry. Then the Jeep coughed. The engine hiccuped, lights on the dash spiking all at once. I guided us to the shoulder before it could stall completely. When we stepped out, the air felt heavier, charged like a thunderstorm without rain. It was too quiet. No insects, no distant birds, just our own breathing. And then came the sound, scraping. Long, deliberate drags across gravel. Something large being pulled slow and steady from the opposite tree line. Trevor muttered, "What the hell is that?" But I already had the flashlight out, beam cutting through the black. She was there, a woman standing between two oaks. Her dress was the color of ash, frayed at the hem, her arms slack at her sides, skin pale in a way that felt wrong, as if light passed through instead of bouncing back. Her face, God, her face, wide eyes fixed directly on us, unblinking. Her lips twitching like she wanted to speak, but her jaw had forgotten the mechanics. "Back in the car," I said, voice cracking. Trevor froze, rooted like he couldn't tell if she was real. Her mouth opened wider, impossibly so until it seemed to stretch past what a human jaw should allow. He gasped, and that was enough to jolt him. We scrambled back into the Jeep, lock slamming down under my palm. The engine stuttered. The scraping drew closer, circling. Something brushed the rear window, a faint tap that sent ice down my spine. The Jeep roared to life on the third turn of the key, and I floored it, fishtailing until the tires bit down and flung us forward. For miles, neither of us spoke. Trees blurred past. Twice I thought I glimpsed her again. Pale form between the trunks, vanishing as quickly as she appeared. My chest hurt from the way I clenched the wheel. At last, the gravel smoothed into cracked pavement. A small town materialized out of the dark, clinging to existence with one gas station, and a diner that looked older than my father. I pulled into the station just to breathe. Inside, a man in his 50s sat behind the counter, reading a tattered newspaper. When I asked about a mechanic, he shook his head. "Not this late," he said. Then he glanced at our Jeep, then at us. "Y'all come through Maple Hollow?" Trevor answered before I could. "Yeah, we saw..." His voice trailed off. The man's jaw tightened. He leaned forward. "Don't go back there. Not in the morning. Not ever." I pressed for an explanation, but he shut down, eyes glued back to his paper. We fueled up in silence and drove on until we found a roadside motel glowing vacancy in neon red. The office was empty. Keys hung neatly behind the desk, one wall clock ticking steadily. We left cash and a note, took a key, and let ourselves in. The room stank faintly of mold and disinfectant, curtains drawn thick, carpet sticky underfoot. We lay down fully dressed, shoes on, lights off. At 3:14 a.m., footsteps crunched outside the window. Not hurried, not wandering, deliberate. They stopped just below the glass. We held our breath. Seconds dragged. Finally, the steps resumed, fading into silence. Neither of us dared look outside. We left before dawn. The note and money were gone. The key was back on the wall. On the outskirts of Asheville, Trevor hurled the entire folder of legends into a dumpster behind a Waffle House. He didn't say a word. I didn't ask. I haven't been back since. But sometimes when I'm driving at night, the radio fizzles into silence for no reason. When I glance into the trees, I swear I see a figure in gray watching, her mouth slowly opening wider than it should. My name's Jordan, and I was 22 the first time I decided to test myself on a long solo drive, not across flat country roads or the predictable highways I'd grown up with, but into the folds of the southern Appalachians, places my family had always called hollows with teeth. I had just graduated from a small college in Tennessee, degree in English, no job lined up yet. I told my parents I was taking the trip to clear my head before real life started, but the truth was more personal. My older brother had disappeared years earlier, somewhere near the Blue Ridge. His car found abandoned at the edge of a trailhead. Nobody ever figured out why he'd gone there or what happened to him. Maybe it was foolish, but I thought retracing pieces of those roads would help me understand, even if it scared me half to death. I packed my hatchback with a few days' worth of clothes, some trail snacks, a tent I knew I'd never use, and my brother's old pocket knife. My mom begged me not to go, but she didn't try to stop me. I think she knew it was pointless. Some things get stuck in your ribs until you dig them out yourself. For the first couple days, it felt almost normal. I wound along parts of the Blue Ridge Parkway, pulling over at overlooks where the mountains folded like ocean waves, layers fading from green to gray to blue. There was beauty in every direction, but I never felt relaxed. The woods pressed close to the road, heavy with silence. Towns appeared out of nowhere. A gas station, a diner, a post office with the paint curling off its sign, and then vanished again like they'd never existed. By the fourth night, I'd crossed into a stretch near Avery County. That's when things shifted. My phone lost service entirely, the GPS map freezing on a blank square of green. I wasn't worried at first. I still had paper maps stuffed in the glove compartment. But dusk was coming fast, and the road narrowed into something more like a forgotten driveway than a byway. When I rounded a bend, I spotted a weathered sign half hidden in vines. Caldwell Hollow, ESTA 1893. There was no town, just the sign. The fuel light blinked on. My tank was sinking toward empty. I told myself I'd stop at the next open place I saw, ask for directions, maybe crash in the car until morning. That's when I came across the building. It sat in a dip of the road, a squat wooden structure with boarded windows and a hand-painted sign above the door. Hilltop Food Share. The crooked cross nailed above the roofline made it look like half chapel, half supply shed. The gravel lot was empty. The woods leaned in on all sides like they wanted to reclaim the place. I parked and stepped out. The air smelled of iron and wet leaves. Inside, the dimness pressed against me. Shelves sagged under the weight of dust-covered cans, boxed meals years past expiration, and jars of cloudy liquid I didn't want to guess at. Near the door sat a counter with a rusted bell and a warped wooden box. Paper note was taped beside it. Pay what you can. God records everything. The message should have been comforting. Instead, it made my skin prickle. I dropped a 10 into the box, grabbed a bottle of water, and turned to leave. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. A man stood in the doorway. I hadn't heard it open. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe in his 40s. His boots were caked with a black mud so thick it looked wet, even though the ground outside was dry. His jeans were damp up to the knees, and his flannel shirt was buttoned tight to the collar despite the warm night. He didn't speak at first, just stared at me with an expression that was neither welcoming nor hostile, just unreadable. "You looking for something?" he finally asked, voice low, toneless. I stammered something about being low on gas, asking where the nearest station was. He tilted his head. "Station's gone. Been gone a long time. Since the flood?" I asked, trying to match what little I'd read about the area. His eyes flickered like I'd said the wrong thing. "What flood?" His voice was sharp this time. He didn't explain. He just stepped slightly aside, still staring as I brushed past him, his eyes on me until I shut the car door. I drove fast, gravel crunching under the tires, but the road wasn't right anymore. 5 minutes later, I passed a bent mailbox with the name Hayward painted faintly in white. The dent on its side made it unmistakable. Drove another few minutes, heart racing, only to see the same mailbox again. And then again. The fourth time I slowed down, staring at it in disbelief. That's when the road spat me out right back in front of the same pantry building. This time the front door was wide open. No sign of the man. Panic settled into my chest. I didn't stop. Kept going faster, my headlights bouncing wildly across the blacktop. The woods pressed tighter until branches scraped against the car like fingernails. That's when she appeared. A woman stood directly on the faded yellow line. Bare feet planted, long hair matted against her face. Her skin was pale in a way that didn't look natural, almost gray. Her arms hung at her sides and her eyelids were shut. But I swear I could feel her watching me. I swerved, heart hammering, narrowly missing her. When I looked back in the mirror, she was gone. I wanted off that road. Anything was better than looping through the same nightmare. At the next narrow gap in the trees, I turned left, bumping onto a dirt track. The branches arched overhead, clawing the roof as the tires slid through mud. At last, the path widened into a clearing. I stopped. 4 lanterns hung from branches around the edges, their yellow light flickering. Beneath them, a blackened circle of stones marked the ground, scorched as if it had been burned again and again. Inside the circle lay bones, small ones, fragile, cracked open like someone had split them to reach what was inside. My breath caught. Then the sound began, a humming, low, layered harmonic. Not one voice but many, weaving together in a chord that made my teeth ache. It came from everywhere at once. Men, women, even children. The same tone, endless, pressing down like weight on my chest. I stumbled backward. That's when I noticed the carvings burned into the bark of the trees encircling the clearing. Not words, not letters. Symbols older than anything I recognized. Each one warped but deliberate, forming a perimeter around the stones. The moment I stepped across the boundary, the humming stopped, silence, and then a crack behind me, sharp as a footstep. I spun, but the clearing was empty. My flashlight beam shook against the trees. Then whispers spilled in, fast, overlapping. 100 voices tangled, rushing in like static through a broken radio. None of it was clear, but the tone was urgent, hungry. I ran, dropped the flashlight, didn't care. I tore through branches, lungs burning until the forest spat me back onto gravel. But my car was gone. No tracks, no marks in the dirt. Nothing. I stood in the dark, chest heaving, certain I was about to collapse, when headlights cut around the bend. I was 24 when I convinced myself I needed to escape. I'd been choking in a cycle of office drudgery and night shifts at a call center, answering the same script over and over until I felt like my voice didn't even belong to me anymore. My roommate didn't make it easier. She collected vinyl records and decided blasting them at 3 in the morning was her form of meditation. I hadn't slept properly in weeks. I wasn't thinking about adventure or romance or self-discovery. I just wanted quiet. Originally, my cousin Hannah was supposed to come with me. We'd made plans, traded Pinterest boards of camping hacks neither of us would ever use. But 2 nights before we were set to leave, she sent me a text saying she couldn't. Some vague excuse about a last-minute internship. I knew her well enough to know she'd spooked herself reading too many stories online about missing hikers. So it was just me. I loaded my Civic with snacks, a jug of water, a thin sleeping bag I'd bought during college, and a box of matches that had never seen action outside of lighting birthday candles. My mom gave me that look, the one that said she didn't trust my plan but couldn't stop me either. I promised her I'd stay on marked roads, check in every night. The usual lies. I pointed the car south away from Knoxville, threading through the Blue Ridge. At first, it was uneventful. Smooth asphalt, a few rest stops. The comfort of podcasts murmuring through the speakers. On the second night, I slept in the driver's seat at a truck stop, feet cramping against the pedals, but I didn't care. It was quiet, and quiet was gold. By the third day, I was farther than I'd ever driven alone. My phone was clinging to a faint signal, the map app stuck on a half-loaded grid. When the roads shrank to patched asphalt, then gravel, I knew I'd slipped beyond what I'd prepared for. Somewhere near a town called Red Ash, the kind of place that looked like its population had been shrinking since the 70s. The road started to feel wrong. Houses appeared every mile or two, but they weren't alive anymore. Roofs caved in, yards overtaken by weeds, barns collapsing into themselves. One farmhouse had a rusted car in the drive and a hand-painted sign nailed to the barn. God keeps count. I told myself it was nothing. People live strange lives in the mountains. Still, I caught myself locking the doors. Then I saw her, a woman in a dirt field standing rigid near a fence swallowed by briars. She wore a tattered coat, boots caked in mud, both hands gripping the handle of a shovel like she'd been frozen mid-dig. Her head turned as my car rolled by. She didn't wave. She didn't even blink, just watched me with that steady, memorizing look. I pressed the gas harder. That night I pulled into what looked like an old hunter's clearing. The ground was flat, a fire pit ringed by stones long gone cold. No other cars, no signal. I set up my tent, boiled water for cheap ramen, and sat in the dark listening to the bugs buzz and the trees shift. For a while it was almost soothing. Until the knocking started, it was precise. Not branches falling, not an animal. 3 knocks evenly spaced, metal against wood. I froze, knife clutched in my sweaty palm. A full minute passed. Then 3 more knocks, closer. I didn't unzip the tent. Didn't breathe louder than I had to. Eventually exhaustion must have claimed me, though I don't remember drifting off. One moment it was night. The next the tent glowed pale with daylight. Everything outside was untouched. No tracks, no broken branches. The same eerie stillness as before. I tore the tent down, stuffed it into the trunk, and drove until I found a gas station clinging to life on the outskirts of another nowhere town. The pumps groaned awake after a few tries. Inside the shelves were half empty, the air stale. The cashier barely looked at me when I asked about hiking trails. "You want the Ridge Fork paths," he said. Then his eyes flicked up for the first time. "Don't go toward Coal Bend." "Why not?" I asked. His mouth tightened. "They don't like outsiders." "Who's they?" He tapped the register with one finger, slow and final. Conversation over, I decided to take his advice. I drove toward Ridge Fork until I found the trailhead. A laminated map on a wooden board matched what my phone had shown before it died. The first mile was easy. Gentle slope, birds calling overhead, bright orange plastic tags marking the trees. But after a while, the markers changed. The orange tags vanished. In their place were strips of faded red cloth tied to branches, leading off the trail at an angle. I hesitated. It wasn't on the map, but curiosity tugged at me. Maybe it was a side loop? Maybe some local shortcut. I followed. The deeper I went, the more the forest shifted. Branches arched lower, brushing my shoulders as though the trail itself didn't want me. And then the forest went silent. Birds, bugs, everything. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. The ribbons changed again. White this time, knotted the same way each time, deliberate. They pulled me into a small clearing. In the center was a crude structure. Logs stacked into a square, 6 feet high, hollow in the middle. Inside was a chair, thin-legged, ancient-looking. Draped across it were clothes so stained they'd lost all color. For a moment I thought someone was slumped there. I edged closer, every hair on my body rising. A branch snapped behind me. I spun. No one. When I turned back, he was there. A man standing beside the structure like he'd been waiting. His coat was a patchwork of rags stitched together, scraps of flannel and denim. One of his eyes was swollen shut. The other bored into me, cold and unblinking. My body locked. I couldn't scream, couldn't run. I just backed away, inch by inch, until the trees swallowed him from view, and the glint of my car's windshield appeared through the branches. I drove until I found a motel, neon buzzing, paint peeling. I didn't care. I shoved cash across the counter, locked the door, triple-checked the chain. At midnight there was a knock. 3 times, the same rhythm as in the woods. I crept to the peephole. The hallway was empty. Just stained carpet under buzzing fluorescent light. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I drove straight through to Charleston, shaking the whole way. I swore I was done, that the mountains had played their trick and I'd escaped. For years, I had been clocking in and out at a job that felt more like a waiting room for death than a career. Then came the breakup. 5 years unraveled in a single fight. and I found myself sitting in an empty apartment, staring at furniture I didn't even like, realizing I couldn't remember the last time I'd done anything that was mine. I sold off what I could, stuffed the rest into storage, and decided to drive north into the Appalachian backroads until the world felt different. Or until I did. I set out in June, heat shimmering off the pavement. My tank full and my phone mostly off. Brought a duffel bag with a few changes of clothes, a cooler of snacks, and my grandfather's old knife I'd never actually used. The first couple of days were almost pleasant. Diners that served hash browns cooked in enough grease to stain your fingers. Sleepy towns where old men tipped their hats, and endless ridges folding into each other like waves. With the windows down and the radio crackling classic rock, I felt like maybe I was shaking off the version of myself that had gone stale. Then I crossed into eastern Kentucky, and the road tightened into something older. A wooden sign with paint so faded it was nearly gone read, "Stovewood Hollow, established 1894. My GPS, which had been lagging, went completely blank the second I turned onto the narrow state road. I knew I should have turned back, but the road called to me the way empty places sometimes do. It didn't take long before the forest swallowed me whole. Branches arched across the asphalt until the sky itself was a stranger. No birdsong, no wind. Just that thick, muffled silence that makes your ears ring. I'd been alone in that tunnel of trees for nearly an hour when I saw her. A woman stood barefoot at the edge of the road, her dress hanging off her like torn curtains, her hair a matted snarl that spilled over her shoulders. She didn't wave or flag me down, but I slowed anyway, rolling the window just an inch. "You all right?" I asked, voice too loud in the quiet. She turned her head toward me with a slowness that felt deliberate. Her eyes stayed half-lidded, as if they belonged to someone trying to stay asleep. "My child's hungry," she said, each word flat and heavy, like stones being dropped in water. A chill ran through me. "Where is he?" Without answering, she stepped off the shoulder and into the trees. No path, no hesitation. One moment she was visible, the next she melted into the forest's shadow. I sat there gripping the wheel, my pulse slamming in my ears. Then I floored it. By the time I reached a small filling station, my hands were still trembling. I told the attendant what I'd seen. He was an older man, gray beard tucked into a flannel shirt. At first he just stared. Then he leaned forward, voice low. "Did she have red around her mouth?" I blinked. "No." He nodded slowly as if that answer had spared me. Then it wasn't her. I wanted to ask what he meant, but he'd already turned back to his register. The conversation closed. That night I didn't bother with a motel. I parked on a dirt pull-off, locked the doors, and tried to sleep in the back seat with the knife under my pillow. Every creak outside made me snap awake, certain she was standing right there. The next morning, exhaustion tugging at me, I found myself detouring again. Not far off the road stood a barn, leaning but not collapsed, its roof patched with tin. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled in. The barn smelled of dust and rot. Shafts of light cut through the gaps in the boards. In one corner, glowing faintly in the dim, was an old soda machine, its neon humming like a dying insect. My skin prickled, but I walked further in, drawn to the stairs that creaked up to the loft. I should have left. At the top, lined neatly against the far wall, were 5 wooden cribs. Empty but not still. They rocked gently, one after the other, though no breeze stirred. The sound was soft, rhythmic, the wood groaning. I froze, then one crib stopped rocking. A second later, the next stilled, one by one until the silence spread across the loft. I held my breath. The last crib twitched. Something inside shifted. A bit of cloth fell aside, and in the shadows beneath, an eye opened. Huge, dark, wet, unblinking. My body broke before my brain caught up. I stumbled backward, foot snapping a board, and went crashing down the stairs, skin tearing on a rusted nail as I hit the dirt floor. I scrambled out of the barn, gasping, and tore away in the car, blood slicking my hand from the gash. The radio offered nothing but static. My phone screen flickered and died completely. All I could hear was the echo of that rocking and the weight of that eye staring from the dark. I drove until the barn was gone from sight, until night crept in. That's when I found a motel tucked into a hillside, its sign buzzing a dull yellow. Room 14 smelled like mildew and cigarettes. I bolted the locks and left the TV murmuring just for the sound. At exactly 3:09 a.m., I woke. Whispers seeped through the thin window glass. Not one voice, but many. Layered, murmuring, urgent. I crawled toward the curtain and dared a glance. The parking lot was full. Dozens of figures moved in slow, swaying steps beneath the lamps. Their forms flickered at the edges like heat mirages. One stepped forward, barefoot, dress shredded. Hair like tangled rope, her face lifted toward me. Her mouth didn't move, but the words rang out as clearly as if she'd whispered into my ear. "My child still hungers." I snapped back, heart thrashing, keys clenched in my fist. I didn't stop to think. I shoved everything into the car and fled into the dark gravel spitting under the tires. By dawn, I had left the mountains behind, but something followed. A week later, back in my apartment, I unzipped my duffel bag to put away the clothes I'd barely touched. Folded neatly on top was a strip of fabric, gray, torn, and stained, that I swear I never touched. I threw it in the trash. At least I think I did. But some nights when I'm half asleep, I hear wood creaking softly in the corner of my room, the steady rhythm of something rocking back and forth, and every so often I dream of an eye opening in the dark, and the sound of a voice, patient, certain, waiting. My name is Claire, and I was 29 when I decided I couldn't stand the noise of my life anymore. I'd been teaching middle school for 6 years, burned out from restless nights, overfilled classrooms, and the constant weight of feeling like nothing I did was enough. A friend of mine joked once that maybe I'd find some soul clarity on a road trip, and the idea latched onto me. I didn't want clarity. I wanted distance. I wanted to hear silence that wasn't filled with my own racing thoughts. So that July, I packed my old hatchback with the bare minimum: a 2-person tent, cooler with some fruit and sandwiches, a pack of trail mix big enough to outlast an apocalypse, and a few books I pretended I'd actually read. My friend Jess had promised to come with me, but at the last minute she bailed with some vague story about family obligations. I wasn't surprised. She hated camping. I pointed my car east and set a loose course through the Smokies up toward the Virginia border, figuring I'd cut north from there. The first couple of days felt like the trip I'd been craving. Winding drives past overlooks so wide they made me dizzy. Trails that smelled like pine sap and moss. Gas station diners that sold coffee strong enough to scrape your throat. I slept in my car the first night, in a tent the second, slowly shaking the city out of my bones. By the third day, things started to bend sideways. It was around midday when I pulled into a small gravel turnout near Avery County. I was boiling water on a camp stove balanced on the hood, when an older couple parked beside me in a wheezing pickup. The man wore a sun-bleached baseball cap and carried himself with the stiff posture of someone who'd worked hard his whole life. He looked harmless enough, even friendly, but when he noticed the paperback I had propped under my arm, some collection of trail ghost stories I'd picked up in Asheville, his eyes narrowed. "You ought to be careful with those," he said, voice gravelly. "Sometimes stories have teeth." Before I could answer, he reached into the truck, rummaged, and handed me a thin, battered book with a faded green cover. The title was stamped crooked across it, Shadows in the Ridge. Self-published, no author listed. Pages yellowed like they'd been sitting in a box for decades. "Page 143, he said. "Read it before you drive after dark." I laughed awkwardly, muttered a thanks, and tucked it away. Jess would have teased me mercilessly about even taking it. That night, camped off a fire road, I finally flipped to the page. The story was titled, The Hollow-Eyed Watcher of Cane Ridge. It told of a figure that appeared to travelers after sundown, standing motionless in the road. "If the Watcher calls your name," it read, "you must not answer. If you speak, he walks with you until your voice is gone." I told myself it was nothing. A piece of backwoods folklore no more real than a campfire tale. Still, I closed the book and shoved it deep into my pack, where I wouldn't see it again. 2 nights later, I woke to Jess's empty seat beside me, the seat she should have filled, if she'd actually come, and the suffocating weight of the car's fogged windows. My shirt clung damp against my back, I was gasping, confused, fumbling for the door handle when I heard it. Don't. The word froze me. It wasn't Jess. Of course it wasn't. But it sounded like her. A whisper sharp enough to cut. I rubbed a circle in the condensation and peered out. Something stood 6 feet away. At first I thought it was a tree. But trees don't face you. They don't have limbs hanging at angles too long to be right. Skin was pale in a way that wasn't human. A color that reminded me of candle wax. Its head tilted, jaw slack. It raised one hand. Not to wave, not to reach, but to point. Directly at me, my breath stuttered. My whole body screamed to fling the door open and run. But Jess's phantom warning echoed. Don't. The figure didn't move closer. It just lowered its arm, turned with an agonizing slowness, and stepped into the tree line. By the time the first edge of dawn touched the horizon, it was gone. I didn't move the car until full daylight. My mind clawed for explanations. Prankster, local lunatic, exhaustion. But when I reached for the book that afternoon, the page I'd been given described exactly what I'd seen. The pale figure. The pointing. The rule about silence from then on. I swore I'd only drive by day, but the mountains don't care what you swear. 3 days later, running low on supplies, I turned down a narrow road marked with a crooked sign. Claremont Hollow, next left. It wasn't on my map. But my cooler was nearly empty and my nerves frayed. I figured a small town might mean a grocery, or at least ice. The hollow was more skeleton than town. A boarded-up church with weeds swallowing the steps. A diner with letters missing from its sign. A general store that leaned so heavily I half expected it to collapse as I walked up the porch. Inside, the air smelled of rot. Shelves sagged with dust-cloaked cans, packages eaten by time. I rang the little bell on the counter, and after a moment an old man shuffled out from a back room. His face unsettled me instantly. His smile was stretched too wide like wax softening under heat. His eyes didn't quite align, drifting past me as if focused on something only he could see. Looking for anything? He asked, his tone rehearsed. Ice, I said, though I regretted opening my mouth. He pointed stiffly to a chest freezer in the corner. I lifted the lid, and inside was a single bag of ice. Perfectly sealed, perfectly solid. But the freezer was unplugged. My skin crawled. I took the bag anyway, dropped a few bills on the counter and left. The man never moved from his spot, never blinked, just watched me through that warped smile as I retreated to the car. Back on the road, I couldn't stop replaying it. When not Max, my mind kept slipping his name in where it didn't belong. When I muttered about the ice, I realized I was alone. I hadn't spoken aloud, but the car seemed heavier, like someone sat in the back seat listening. Night fell quicker than I expected. My goal was a rest stop near Maple Gap, but the sun vanished and shadows rose too fast. That's when the headlights appeared in my rear view, blinding, too close, flooding the mirrors. I slowed to let them pass. They didn't. Then, without sound, they vanished. I exhaled a shudder of relief, only for them to reappear moments later, burning brighter, filling every angle of glass. It wasn't a car. There was no engine noise, no crunch of tires on gravel, just light, pressing, unrelenting. I gripped the wheel and drove faster. The beams stayed with me. Then, as I rounded a bend, a figure stepped into the road ahead, pale, hairless, watching. Its arm lifted, finger extended, pointing straight at my windshield. The engine cut out. The lights inside the car flickered and died. In the suffocating dark, I heard my phone buzz once, then go still. The figure tilted its head. My breath hitched, my hands useless on the wheel. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But all I could do was sit in silence as it lowered its arm and turned away. A moment later, the dashboard blinked back to life. The car sputtered, then roared awake like nothing had happened. I drove until sunrise, not daring to stop. When I finally reached a KOA near Lynchburg, I rented a cabin with 4 walls and a lock. That night, I pulled the old book from my pack, carried it out. I was 26 the summer I made the worst decision of my life. I'd been working dead-end shifts at a warehouse outside Columbus, nights mostly, dragging pallets across echoing floors until my body felt like it wasn't my own. My girlfriend had broken up with me in June, saying I'd turned into a ghost of myself. Maybe she wasn't wrong. I wanted to prove to her, to me, to no one in particular, that I could still do something spontaneous, something real. That's how I ended up agreeing to a half-planned road trip with my old friend Mark. We'd been close back in high school, but hadn't seen much of each other since. He called out of the blue and pitched the idea. A long drive through the Virginia highlands, camping rough, seeing the parts of Appalachia nobody talks about. He had this obsession with finding roads not on GPS, little forgotten hollows that never made the tourist brochures. I should have remembered how reckless he'd always been, but I was desperate for escape. I said yes. He showed up in a dented Jeep that looked like it had spent years baking in the sun. The paint had once been red, maybe, but now it was closer to rust. The inside smelled like old fast food wrappers, and the rearview mirror was barely hanging on by its screws. He grinned as if that rattling wreck was a ship, and we were setting out to sea. We loaded up with cheap camping gear, a cooler of snacks and more gas station energy drinks than I thought one human could consume. Mark promised we'd end up in a small town called Laurel Bend, where there was supposed to be a bluegrass festival, but he couldn't help himself. Every 20 minutes he veered off down some gravel track, saying he wanted to see the real mountains. The first day was harmless. Trees rose in green walls on either side. Wildflowers grew in patches along the shoulder, and the canopy swallowed the sky. We pulled over at an overlook where mist curled in the valleys below, and joked that we should just stay there forever. By nightfall, we'd pitched our tent in a clearing off a logging road and drank lukewarm beer until the woods faded into darkness. The second day cracked open different. The further we drove, the less normal things seemed. The forest pressed in tighter, branches arching overhead until the road felt like a tunnel. Sunlight struggled to reach the ground, and when it did, it landed in strange fractured patterns. The air smelled heavy, damp and metallic, as if it had soaked up something it shouldn't have. Then the road spat us into a hollow that wasn't on any map. A hand-painted sign nailed to a leaning post read, "Ashford Glen, Pop 212. But the place was dead. A boarded-up church sagged on one side. A diner's windows were black with grime, and the general store leaned sideways like it had tried to walk away and failed. I told Mark we should turn around, but he was grinning. "This is exactly what I wanted," he said. "Forgotten America." Inside the general store, the shelves drooped with dust-covered cans. We rang the bell on the counter and an old man shuffled out. His smile didn't move right, stretched too tight as if it had been carved there. His eyes didn't settle on me or Mark. They slid past us like he was focusing on something farther away. "Need anything?" he asked, voice thin and papery. "Got ice?" Mark said. The man pointed to a chest freezer in the corner. It was unplugged, the cord dangling loose, but when we opened it, inside was a single bag of ice, solid and perfect. Cold mist curled off it as if it had just been made. My stomach twisted. Mark grabbed it, dropped a couple of bills on the counter, and we left. The man hadn't moved. He just stood there watching, that fixed smile never fading. Back in the car, Mark muttered, "Did you see his eyes? They weren't really looking at us." I told him to drive. The sun was falling by then, shadows lengthening across the road. My phone screen was dead, searching endlessly for a signal. The Jeep rattled down another narrowing stretch of gravel when I caught sight of something ahead. A car. It was a white sedan, parked at an angle across the road. Its front tire shredded, the driver's door hanging open. Long gouges clawed the passenger side, too jagged, too uneven to be from another vehicle. My throat went dry. "Go around it," I said. Mark eased the Jeep into the ditch to squeeze past. Gravel scraped the undercarriage, but we didn't stop. I forced my eyes forward, terrified of what I might see if I looked inside. The road beyond grew worse. The trees closed in tighter, their branches so close they scraped the windows. Then I saw movement. A figure stood on the shoulder, a hoodie pulled up, hands in pockets, head lowered. "Still as a statue, Mark," I whispered. "There's someone—" "I see him," Mark cut in, his voice flat. We drove past. The figure didn't turn. Then another appeared. Same hoodie, same posture, standing exactly the same way a few yards down. Then another, and another. They were evenly spaced like fence posts lining the road. My pulse thudded in my ears. "What the hell is this?" I asked. "Don't look at them," Mark said. "Just keep facing forward." We jolted over a rut so deep the Jeep nearly bottomed out. My teeth clacked together. When I looked up, one of them was crouched in the road ahead. The headlights hit him. He rose, not like a person would, but like a puppet pulled by strings. His arms hung too long, his joints bending wrong. And his face, there was no face. Just smooth, pale skin stretched blank over bone. Mark slammed the brakes. The Jeep skidded sideways, tires screaming. Dust rose, then silence. The engine died. The headlights blinked out. Darkness swallowed us. I fumbled for the flashlight under the seat, thumb trembling on the switch. The weak beam flickered, catching Mark's face, frozen, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "What?" I asked. He didn't answer. I turned. Something pressed against my window. A gray hoodie, no face. Just a smooth smear of condensation on the glass where breath should have been. The flashlight clattered out of my hand. Mark twisted the key again. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Then, on the third try, the engine roared back. Headlights flared. The Jeep lurched into reverse, gravel spitting. We scraped the ditch but didn't stop, backing up as fast as the tires would let us. Figures stepped out from the trees, one after another, hooded, faceless. They didn't run, they didn't chase. They just shifted to the side, letting us pass. My name's Daniel, and I was 24 the year I decided to clear my head the hard way. I just finished a grueling year in grad school in Richmond. Endless papers, late-night grading shifts, a breakup that still stung every time my phone buzzed with nothing from her. I felt like I'd been living under fluorescent lights for months. One night, staring at my apartment ceiling fan spin in slow circles, I thought, I need to get out before I start rotting here too. That's how I convinced myself a solo drive through the Appalachian backcountry would be therapeutic. I had an old Ford Ranger that had been my dad's. It rattled whenever it hit 50, but it was mine, and it felt like the right vessel for disappearing for a while. I tossed a duffel bag in the passenger seat, a sleeping bag behind the bench, and left without telling anyone exactly where I was going. I wanted to be unreachable, if only for a week. The first couple of hours outside of Richmond were dull interstate, flat landscapes, and chain gas stations that all smelled of burnt coffee and mop water. But as I pushed deeper into the mountains of southwestern Virginia, the roads began to twist like ribbons laid carelessly over ridges. The air tasted different, damp, piney, older somehow. I wasn't following a map. I just turned whenever a road looked interesting. It was around dusk when I spotted a sign nailed crookedly to a leaning pole. Harrow Creek, 7 miles. The name caught me. Harrow. It didn't sound like a vacation spot, but it sounded forgotten, and that was exactly what I wanted. The paved road gave way to patched asphalt, then gravel, then just dirt. My headlights carved tunnels through trees that leaned too close, their branches scratching the truck like fingernails on metal. Every dip and bump rattled the toolbox in the back until it sounded like bones shaking in a coffin. At first, I told myself I'd go a couple miles in, turn around, and head back. But the road kept going, narrowing with every bend until I felt trapped in the funnel of it. When I finally spotted a structure through the trees, I slowed, relieved. It was a cabin, if you could call it that. The roof sagged inward, and the porch leaned at such a sharp angle I couldn't imagine anyone walking across it. On the railing, nailed crooked, was a sign painted in faded black letters. Ash House. The windows were boarded from the inside. A few hundred yards further stood another building. Willow House. This one had curtains drawn tight and a child's tricycle rusting on the porch, half tipped into weeds. I felt my gut tighten, but curiosity pushed me on. Maybe Harrow Creek is just one of those ghost hollows, I thought. An old coal town left behind. The road dipped into a clearing, and there it was. A sagging general store with cracked windows, its wooden planks black with mildew. A faded fair poster hung crooked on the glass, County Jubilee 1974. Its colors drained to gray. Above the door, nailed into warped wood, was a hand-painted open sign. The words scratched in pencil and nearly illegible. The door was cracked. I told myself I'd just peek in, Inside, the air hit me with a thick smell of mold and vinegar, sharp enough to sting my eyes. Wooden shelves bowed under the weight of rusted cans, their labels bleached into nonsense. A jar of something floating in cloudy liquid sat on the counter. Behind that counter was a stool. On it sat a man, or something like one. He was hunched over a small TV that flickered with static, the cord dangling loose from the wall. His face was slack, skin drooping like melted wax, eyes clouded but strangely fixed on me the second I spoke. "You open?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His jaw creaked as he shifted. "You got a tag?" "A what?" He smiled, or maybe grimaced, I couldn't tell. "Guests don't pass through," he said, voice flat and deliberate. "They stay." A chill rolled over me so fast it felt like ice water dumped down my back. I forced a laugh. "I just need gas," I said. He jerked his head toward the rear door. "Pumps out back. Hand crank. Cash only." I left a 20 on the counter, though he never looked at it, and went out back. The pump was older than anything I'd seen outside a museum. The paint had flaked off until it was bare, pitted metal. I cranked until my shoulder burned, filling maybe a quarter of a tank, enough to get me out. When I turned back toward the store, the door was shut tight. No static, no light. Inside the truck, the steering suddenly felt easier, like whatever drag had been there before was gone. Relieved, I put the place behind me fast, but 5 minutes later my headlights lit up Ash House again, then Willow House. Only this time the curtains weren't drawn. Faces pressed to the glass, blurred, pale, watching me pass. I slammed my foot on the gas. The truck barreled over every rut and stone, toolbox clattering, my heart pounding harder than the engine. When the clearing opened again, my stomach dropped. Same general store, same poster, same cracked glass, but now the door was wide open. The static wasn't faint anymore, it was roaring, rattling the window panes as if the whole building buzzed with it. I threw the truck into reverse and tore back down the loop. Branches scraped both sides, shrieking against metal. When I passed Ash House again, the door was ajar. A rocking chair on the porch tilted slowly, though no wind stirred. On the next pass, there were figures behind the glass. Children this time. 3 of them, legs dangling from the porch of Willow House, faces blank as chalk. They didn't move. They just watched. My throat closed up. I stomped the gas, barreling forward blindly. The road twisted, the truck shuddered, and suddenly, pavement. Smooth striped pavement. No transition, no sign, just there. I almost sobbed with relief. My phone pinged back to life, screen glowing with missed notifications. Civilization was close. 20 minutes later, I pulled into a gas station glowing under fluorescent lights, the kind that hum like insects. Inside, the shelves were bright and full, music playing faintly over tinny speakers. Kid behind the counter barely looked up from his phone when I walked in. "Hey," I said, still shaky. "You ever hear of Harrow Creek?" He blinked, finally focusing on me. Then his expression changed, tight, cautious. "Ain't no Harrow Creek, not for decades." "What do you mean?" "Used to be a hollow out that way. Closed off in the 70s. Folks said the mines poisoned the water. Or maybe the people poisoned each other. Nobody agrees. But nobody goes there now." His eyes narrowed. "You didn't stop, did you?" I didn't answer. I just left. Back in the truck, my hands were trembling so bad I could barely turn the key. The engine roared. The headlights flicked on. For a second, everything felt normal again, until I glanced at the passenger window. In the dust, where no one should have been close enough to touch. My name's Sarah, and I was 23 the summer I drove myself into the kind of trouble you only hear about in late-night campfire stories. I just walked away from a teaching internship in Raleigh that had chewed me up and spat me out. Months of wrangling middle schoolers who didn't care, supervisors who nitpicked every word, and paychecks that barely covered gas. By July, I was so fried that my mother suggested I come home for a while, but the thought of sleeping in my childhood bedroom under pastel wallpaper felt like admitting defeat. So instead, I packed up my hatchback with whatever I thought could pass for adventure gear, an old tent my uncle once used hunting, a sleeping bag that smelled faintly of mildew, a cooler half full of convenience store snacks, and a journal I swore I'd fill with thoughts that might save me from turning into another burned-out adult. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Honestly, I didn't know myself. I just wanted to drift somewhere with no cell signal, no obligations, and no one who could remind me that I'd failed at everything I tried. For the first few days, I stuck to the Blue Ridge Parkway. Curving roads, overlooks that made the valleys look endless, and the illusion that maybe solitude was good medicine. I ate greasy gas station biscuits, slept in the back of the car with the windows cracked, and watched lightning bugs swarm in the dusk. For a while, it felt like I'd done the right thing. On the fourth day, I crossed the state line into the far edge of Tennessee, near Carter County. My phone signal died on a winding road, and the silence felt heavier than usual. That's when I saw the wooden marker, half sunk into weeds. Raven Rock, 5 miles. Something about the name caught me. It didn't sound like a tourist stop. It sounded older, like a place that existed long before hikers and guidebooks. I turned without hesitation. The road narrowed to dirt almost immediately, the canopy of oak and hemlock twisting overhead until the daylight dimmed. My tires bumped over stones, and the whole car rattled like it was coming apart. I should have turned back, but some part of me wanted to see what Raven Rock was hiding. A mile in, the forest went silent. No birds, no crickets, not even the buzz of flies. Just the crunch of my wheels and the occasional thump of a branch scraping the roof. That's when I spotted it. A house. It stood about 50 feet back from the road. Crooked on its foundation, the wood siding bleached gray like bones left in the sun. The porch sagged, its steps half-rotted. A hand-painted sign above the door read, Blackthorn House. The windows were boarded from the inside, but the door hung ajar. I parked, though I couldn't explain why. I had no weapon, no phone service, no plan. Still, I stepped out. The porch groaned under my weight. Dust motes floated in the slice of light cutting through the doorway. Inside was emptiness. No furniture, no curtains, just floorboards coated in decades of grime, except for the footprints, bare, human, pressed deep into the dust. They led from the doorway to the back hallway and stopped. No return prints, no explanation. My chest tightened. I told myself to leave, but my eyes caught something in the kitchen. A chipped plate sat on the counter, holding a hunk of bread so moldy it looked fossilized. Beside it was a glass of water half full. There wasn't a speck of dust on the rim. That was all I needed. I backed out slow, every nerve screaming. I didn't turn my back until I was at the car. That's when I saw her. She stood directly behind the hatchback. A girl or a woman, it was hard to tell. Thin frame swallowed in a white cotton dress stained gray with dirt. Bare feet planted in the gravel. Her hair hung in a braid half undone, strands loose around her face. Her eyes were dark, unreadable, fixed on me like I was prey she wasn't finished studying. I tried to speak. Hey, are you? Nothing, do you need? Her head tilted slightly, but her expression didn't change. I gripped the door handle, heart slamming against my ribs. When she stepped forward, just one deliberate pace, I panicked. I dove into the driver's seat, slammed the lock, and twisted the key. The engine coughed, then clicked uselessly. My pulse roared in my ears. I turned it again. Same choking rattle. I glanced up. She was inches from the glass, her palm pressed flat against the window, smearing the dust. She leaned her forehead against the same spot, her eyes wide and unblinking, her lips twitching into a smile that stretched too far, too sudden, like she was relearning how faces worked. I twisted the key again, and the engine screamed to life. She didn't flinch. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning, gravel spraying, and shot back up the dirt road. Branches whipped the sides of the car, and I kept my eyes locked on the road ahead. I didn't want to see if she was following. The forest blurred. And then, just like that, asphalt. Cracked but real. Pavement stretching into the distance. I drove for what felt like hours until a gas station appeared, humming under fluorescent lights. People moved inside, chatting, eating, buying snacks like the world hadn't just tilted sideways in the woods. I parked under the brightest light I could find and stayed there, gripping the steering wheel until exhaustion dragged me under. The next morning, in a motel 2 towns over, I convinced myself it had been stress, a hallucination born of exhaustion and silence, a warning from my subconscious to go home. But when I opened the car to grab my duffel, I froze. On the inside of the driver's window was a handprint, the same size as hers, pressed deep into the dust. When I touched it, flakes crumbled away like dead skin. I left the car in that lot and bought a bus ticket. I never went back to Tennessee. And sometimes, in the quiet of my apartment, I swear I hear fingernails tracing the inside of my window.